Hello, brilliant minds. Welcome to another episode of Research Methodology with Dr. Pree. And today we are going to be focusing on do not do these things when it comes to putting together a research title. So over the last 2 episodes, we've been talking about how to put together a research title. I'd also given you some examples in various disciplines on how to put your titles together. However, there are certain common mistakes when it comes to putting together your research title, even when you have done the various tips, that I had given you. As I had said previously in those episodes, those tips are not set in stone, but I do hope that they provide a good guideline or a good template for you. However, in spite of those guidelines, there are still various mistakes that you would find some people putting into their research titles. And today, that's what we are going to be focusing on. So we're going to be focusing on some of the common mistakes that are done when putting together a research title and how to fix them or how to avoid them totally altogether. So the first thing that I just want to establish is that when it comes to putting together your research title, this is one of the most fundamental and most important parts of your research study. That's one of the first things. In fact, the first thing your examiner, your supervisor, or anybody who comes across your research is going to see. They are going to see your title. And therefore, apart from the 5 elements that I had spoken about in the previous episodes that your title should have, your title should also set the tone for everything else in your research study, and therefore you have got to ensure that it at least holds one of 3 of these next things that I'm talking about. So number 1, your title needs to signal what your discipline is. Okay, we shouldn't be confused when we pick up your study, we read your research title and you're in one discipline and then it highlights something else completely. Number 2, it also has to highlight what is the scope of your study. As I had said, I think in our first episode, your research study has got a timeline and a time frame, and so you cannot study everything in the world. There's only a small chunk of the expanse of knowledge that is out there that you can study, and therefore your research title should be able to show us what is that limit or what is the scope of your research study. And number 3, which is something that is extremely important, is that your title actually makes a promise. It makes a promise of what you are going to do, and it also makes a promise of what you have already done. And therefore, whatever you have promised that you're going to do within your study or what you have already done has got to be highlighted in your title. So as usual, we're going to use a simple analogy to try and explain these don't do these things. So imagine you walking into a restaurant. One of the first things that you are given by a waiter or a waitress is a document, and that document is a menu. All right. So that document basically tells you what the restaurant is going to offer you, what they can offer you. And honestly speaking, that menu will basically make you decide whether you're going to sit down and enjoy the services of that restaurant or not. Your research title is kind of like your menu. Your examiner or your supervisor or whoever else is going to pick up your study basically decides what it is that they're going to receive once they have read your title. Now, there are certain things that general things that will stop you from sitting down at a restaurant and eating at that restaurant after looking at the menu. So let's explore 6 of those common things. So imagine that you walk into a restaurant, you have been given the menu, and then all of a sudden you realize that the menu is written in Chinese and you don't know a word of Chinese, or it's written in Japanese and you don't know a word in Japanese, or it's written in Shona, or it's written in Swahili, and you've got no idea what this means. This is the same as using abbreviations in your title because it's a language that most people do not understand. That is a red flag when it comes to a research title, and we'll be looking at that later on in this episode. Number 2, imagine walking into a restaurant. Once again, you have received the menu, but the menu just says, "Welcome to Dr. Pree's restaurant, and what we have on service today is food." What does that mean? Of course, I've come to a restaurant to sit down and have food, or to sit down and have something to eat. Having a title that is too broad is like having a menu where it has written there that all they offer is food. Food can mean anything. Do you mean dessert? Do you mean bread? Do you mean cake? Do you mean fries? Do you mean burgers? What exactly is it that you mean? We'll be talking about that. Number 3, imagine that you are craving for sushi. You have found a wonderful restaurant online which claims that they sell sushi. You go to that restaurant, and all of a sudden you open up the menu, and what's on the menu is burgers, fries, and ribs. That would be something that is very disappointing. This is what happens when you have a title that highlights the wrong discipline. So you have a certain discipline that you belong to, but your title says otherwise. It's like having a sushi restaurant that is having a menu that sells or lists burgers. Number 4, imagine a restaurant promising a 5-course meal. You're excited. You've never been to such a fancy restaurant before. You order your meal, and then all of a sudden what comes out of the kitchen is a 2-course meal. You'll be highly disappointed. And this is what happens when a lot of people overpromise or overstate what their study will do within the title. Okay. And number 4, imagine having or looking at a menu and you see such flowery or interestingly, out of this world language like alarmingly rich, devastatingly indulgent. These words sound really nice, especially when it comes to, chocolate cake or whatever it is, okay? But what does a devastatingly indulgent cake mean? All right. So this is what happens when you put in emotional or opinionated language within your title. We actually don't know what you mean by alarmingly rich. We don't know what you mean by devastatingly alarming or whatever it is. So that's what happens when you put in very emotional language within your title. And number 6, having a menu that is longer than a meal that it says it is going to provide is like having a title that just becomes too long and too wordy. All right. So a title that is so long that it becomes basically a paragraph is the same, or we can say that we can compare that to a menu that is basically longer than its meal. So for this episode of Research Methodology with Dr. Pree, I'm going to be giving you 12 things that you should be aware of, that you should try to avoid when it comes to putting together your research title. So please take out a pen and a paper. I'll also make sure, and please make sure that you write notes, but I'll also make sure that I will provide a list of these things within the description box. So please make sure that you check the description box and have this document on hand as a free resource for you. Once again, these rules are not set in stone, but they will help you in your research journey as you go along. And I can guarantee to some extent that this is very useful information for you. So I hope you are ready. Let's go. All right. So number 1, don't write a title that belongs to the wrong discipline. All right. You have got to make sure that whatever title that you come up with, it has got to cover your degree name. Okay, so if a stranger were to pick up your research title, they were supposed to read your research title, will they be able to pinpoint or at least have some sort of clear idea of what discipline that you are in? So let me give you an example. Imagine that you read the title, A Statistical Analysis of Neural Pathway Activation in Bilingual Children During Second Language Acquisition. What is the first discipline that will come to mind? It kind of like reads like a title that comes from a neuroscience discipline or a cognitive psychology, sort of discipline. But won't you be shocked, or won't you be surprised if I told you that this title actually belongs to somebody who is doing their master's in education? It doesn't really read that. Okay, so a better way of phrasing that would be the influence of bilingual neural processing on second language learning outcomes among primary school children in Cape Town. All right, going back to some of the tips that I had given you before, we now can see that there is a clear population that is there. We know that this study is covering primary school children. Whenever you're talking about primary, secondary school education or whatever, the first thing that comes to mind is teachers, and therefore that links to education. So now the education context is clear, and that is basically your discipline. So you always have to make sure that whatever it is that you are studying, or whatever it is that your title is, you have got to make sure that it falls in line with your discipline. So on that note, I just want to highlight something very important here. When we're talking about making sure that your title belongs to a certain discipline, you'll actually find that, to be honest, anything in quotes is actually researchable, but it just has got to fall within the confines of your discipline. All right. Later on within this episode, I'll be talking about the difference between a topic and a title. A topic is something that is of a large interest. So your interest area, and from your interest area then comes your title. All right. So when you have different disciplines, all right, you've got to make sure that even though you might have the same topic as somebody else within a different discipline, your title has got to speak to your direct discipline. So I'm going to give you an example, okay? Person A, B, and C are all interested in gender-based violence, but person A is within the commerce discipline, person B is within ICT discipline, and person C is within law. Now, how then are we going to take this same topic and make sure that we align whatever titles that we come up with within these three different disciplines? So I'll give you various examples. So gender-based violence within the commerce setting, all right? One would, for example, term their title as the impact of gender-based violence on employee productivity and absenteeism in South African workplaces. All right, you can see that speaks to the commerce discipline, even though the topic is, quite broad. All right, but you can see that they have narrowed it and they have defined it within the context of their discipline. So let's look at person B. Okay, person B is within the ICT faculty. All right, so they would perhaps term their title as cyber harassment as a form of gender-based violence on social media platforms. All right. They're still talking about gender-based violence, but they're talking about it in the context of ICT. So they're talking about cyber harassment. They're also talking about social media platforms. All right. Let's look at person C. They are within the law discipline. So the effectiveness of protection orders in preventing gender-based violence in South Africa. You can see there that it's clear from the get-go that once you hear protection orders, the first thing that comes to mind is law. All right. So you can see that we all have the same topic. In quotes, that means that we have the same interest, but we have made sure that we have defined those topics within the context of our different disciplines. So now let's go to tip number 2, right? The never-ending title. Do not write a title that is so long that it becomes like paragraph. I think in one of the previous episodes, I had actually spoken about how I'm not very sure of how long your title should be, so I went to do some small research of my own, and a good rule of thumb is that if your title is longer than 20 words, then it's too long. So just try and make sure that your title should not exceed 20 words. So let me give you an example. An investigation into the various factors that may potentially contribute to the underperformance of grade 12 learners in mathematics in selected township secondary schools in the Gauteng province of South Africa. Honestly, that title is exhausting. It is just too long. You already feel tired before you finished reading it. In fact, I actually feel as if I'm getting a six-pack around my mouth right now. All right, you need to make sure that your title is simple and straight to the point. I think that's something that I have stressed a lot within our last few episodes. You know, the more direct, the more focused your title is, the better it is for you. You'll actually find that when you go straight to the point when it comes to your title, you will actually be so surprised that it actually has more effect, using less words than trying to be, all over the place and so self-explanatory. All right. Now let's take that same title and rephrase it. So a good rephrasing of that title would be Factors Contributing to Mathematics Underperformance Among Grade 12 Learners in Township Schools in Gauteng. This is the same study. This is the same title that has been rephrased. It's half of the amount of words that have been used. And honestly speaking, it has twice the impact because we know from the get-go that you're looking at underperformance. You're looking at grade 12 learners. We know that you're looking at township schools within Gauteng. There was no meaning that was lost. So always make sure that you are direct and that you're straight to the point. And this leads me to number 3, which can be a little bit controversial. This rule is not set in stone, but it might be better for you. All right. So try as much as possible not to open your title with phrases that do not add anything meaningful to your title. A very good example of this is saying a study of, or an investigation of, or a research on. I do know that there's some people who put those things in their titles, but it's rather better to put such elements within the title itself rather than to start the title with that. So for example, saying the impact of blah 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 blah, a study of, or a case study within a South African private higher education institution, or whatever the case is a much better way of expressing that title rather than starting the title off with a case study of or a study of. And the reason for that is because we already know that this is a study. We already know that this is a research. We already know that you're exploring or you are looking at. So saying it at the beginning of your title doesn't add anything meaningful to it. And these are what we term as filler phrases. All right. So just try and make sure that you avoid this as much as possible. Although, to be honest, there are some cases where that is an exception. And like I said, this might be controversial because there are various titles which have that. But I think it's much better to go directly or straight to the point. So instead of saying, for example, a study of the impact of social media on academic performance among university students, it would be much better to just go direct and straight to the point and say the impact of social media use on academic performance in the previous example we had said among university students, but remember our 5 rules. You've got to make sure that you define your context. You have got to make sure that you define your population. So this would read better as among undergraduate students at South African universities. All right. If let's say I wanted to add that element of a study of, all right, then maybe what I could say is the impact of social media use on academic performance among undergraduate students, a case study of, or an investigation into, I don't know if that sounds really great, but it would be better to say a case study of this particular context, a case study of a South African university or a case study of whatever the case may be. Other examples that, you find are filler phrases within various titles are with special reference to, with particular emphasis on, an exploration of, a consideration of, try as much as possible to eliminate those filler phrases, because in all honesty, it does not necessarily have any additional impact on your title. All right. Number 4, which of course we have spoken about in several contexts. I think we have, spoken about this in full detail within our last 2 episodes, is the issue of being so broad. So don't be so broad that your title now starts to describe a million different studies within that title itself, So saying technology and education, I think in one of the previous episodes, I had given a example of saying plants and water. That is too broad. In actual reality, that is a topic, because that is an area of interest. A title should come from that. So you can narrow that down to the effect of technology on learning, but that is still too broad. Okay. It just is still vague. What type of technology are you talking about? What kind or types of learning, are you talking about? From whom? Who are we talking about when we're talking about, technology or learning? A better way of phrasing this would be the effect on tablet-based learning applications on reading comprehension among grade 3 learners in rural KwaZulu-Natal schools. We now know that you're talking about KwaZulu-Natal schools. We know that when you're talking about the effect of technology, we know that you're talking about grade 3 learners. All right. We're not talking about any other types of learners. Okay. So this is now a real study. Okay. You're talking about a specific technology and you're talking about a specific outcome. Number 5, which is also something that you should be worried about. We always talk about how broad our titles should not be, but your title should also not be so narrow that it sounds like a lab report and not an actual study. So for example, saying the reading comprehension scores of 23 grade 3 learners at Tembaletu Primary School in Pinetown during term 2 of 2024 is something that is too narrow. It is something that you would have done within your actual study and shouldn't be the title of your study itself. I don't know if that makes sense. You have got to make sure that whatever title that you come up with, which I think I've mentioned within our other episodes as well, is that your research has got to be reproducible. So are we able to take the title that you have given us and reproduce it within another or a similar context? All right. So for example, saying reading comprehension challenges among grade 3 learners in under-resourced primary schools in eThekwini district. Are we able to take that same title and do the same study within different contexts? Yes, because we can change just one part of that title and it becomes a different study altogether. So for example, we can change the element of grade 3 learners and change that into grade 12 learners. We can change that into undergraduate students. We can change that into, whatever it is. We can also change the context. So we can change eThekwini district. We can leave every other thing within the title the same and just change eThekwini district and, focus on Umtata district, for example, whatever it is. All right. So you have got to make sure that your title is specific enough to also be doable, and broad enough to be meaningful beyond your actual sample. So within your study itself, on the previous example that I had given, where you're talking about comprehension scores of 23 grade 3 learners, in this school, in this term, this will be something that you would then define within your study that, okay, you want to just look at 23 learners. Okay. Are we going to have, a similar effect if we looked at 50 learners, if we looked at 60 learners? All right. Those should be within your study and not the title of your study. So try and make sure that your title does not sound like a lab report, but it actually sounds like a study. Let's go on to number 6. All right. Try and make sure that your titles are as academic as possible. Do not use emotional or opinionated language within your title, because your research study title is not the same as an opinion piece and it is not the same as an essay. That is something that is completely different. Okay, you've got to make sure that whatever you want to find out comes out from your results. Okay, remember that you're a researcher and you have got to be as unbiased as possible. Your research is supposed to lead you to a certain conclusion. You're not supposed to come up with the conclusion first before your evidence has shown that. So saying, for example, the devastating impact of poverty on the educational outcomes of South African children is you being opinionated and is you being emotional. All right, you can even see that the way that I have even said the title is different. Okay, devastating is your opinion. All right, your research is supposed to find out, or the evidence that you gather within your study is supposed to tell you that yes, there is a devastating impact. All right, it should not reflect within your title first. Okay, saying the alarming rise of cyberbullying among teenagers and its dangerous effects on mental health. When we gather the evidence will tell us whether there is an alarming rise on cyberbullying. It will tell us whether there is a dangerous effect on mental health. Okay, so please make sure that you allow the data that you get to tell you, all right, whether there's a devastating impact, whether, there's an alarming rise or whatever the case is, all right. You have got to stay neutral, and your title has also got to stay as neutral as possible. Number 7, please do not pack your title with abbreviations that nobody will know. Let me give you an example. So, EFL learner attitudes towards CLT approaches in TVET institutions, a mixed method study using SLA frameworks in the DBE context. In this title alone, I have used 5 abbreviations, which honestly speaking is one too many. Okay, 5 abbreviations is too many, and there shouldn't be any abbreviation in your research title at all to begin with. Normally, a rule of thumb is that any time that you want to use an abbreviation, you've got to define the abbreviation first. Whether it's in academic writing, whether it's in fiction, whatever it is, you've got to define the abbreviation first, and then you can use the abbreviation subsequently. The same should also reflect within your title. Define all of your abbreviations, or write the full meaning. That's what I mean by define. Write the full wording of your abbreviation within your title, and then later on within your writing, then you can then change to abbreviations. And this is extremely important because not everybody within your discipline is going to pick up your research study. Even if somebody within the education discipline were to read the title that I had given you, it will still take them a moment to first think and cast their mind back and refocus, as to what EFL is and CLT is. They'll just need a moment to remember. How much so people who are not within your discipline? So you've got to make sure that you are as simple as possible. Everybody needs to understand what your title is about. So a better way of expressing this would be English as a foreign language learner attitudes toward communicative language teaching in South African technical and vocational colleges. You can see that some of the abbreviations that I had spoken about in the previous example have now been defined here. So EFL has been defined, TVET has also been defined, and CLT has also been defined. All right. There are, however, some abbreviations that are universally recognized, like, for example, HIV or HIV and AIDS or DNA, or sometimes even AI now, but if you are able to define these, the better for you, especially if it is discipline specific. Number 8, I won't dwell too much on this because we have spoken about this quite a number of times. Do not confuse your topic with your title. Topic is something that is broad. Topic is something that sparks your interest, and your title is supposed to be a narrowed down version of your topic. It comes from your topic. So try and make sure that you do not come up with a title that is too broad and that looks like a topic at the end of the day. Number 9, Please do not overpromise the world. Don't promise the universe and then you're only able to give us Jupiter. Okay, so don't promise in your title what your study cannot actually deliver. All right. A very good example is stating a comprehensive analysis of all factors affecting youth unemployment across all sectors in South Africa. It is not possible for you to look at all factors. It's not possible for you to examine all sectors. Remember that you have a time frame. Remember that your research study has got to be within a particular scope. Even if you had all of the time in the world, you still cannot study all factors. You still cannot study all sectors. So you have got to make sure that you pick one or you pick two that you are studying. Your title has got to show that your study is within a certain scope that can handle the time that you have allocated to you for your program. All right. So if you're within a 1-year program, are you able to pick one factor within one sector? If you're doing a 2-year program, are you able to, narrow down your scope to something that is doable within a 2-year time frame? Also taking into consideration that, there's writing that you have to do, there's data collection that you have to do, there's data analysis that you have to do. So in actual fact, when you're looking at your time frames, you're actually looking at something that is less than that. So you've got to make sure that whatever that you promise that you're going to do, you need to be able to fulfill. It is always better to underpromise and then overachieve rather than to overpromise and then to underachieve. Another example is saying solving the youth unemployment crisis in South Africa through education reform. We understand that you want to win the next Nobel Peace Prize. We understand that you want to solve all of the world's problems. But within the time frame that you have, is that possible? In most cases, no. What is mostly possible is you contributing knowledge to that space or contributing, some sort of small part of the big solution puzzle. All right. So your study cannot solve, for example, a national crisis that is out there. The chances of that happening are very slim. All right. So please make sure that your study is actually doable. All right. You've got to make sure that you're honest about what you can achieve. A better way of expressing the first example that I had given would be education and employment pathways, factors influencing youth unemployment among TVET graduates in Johannesburg. We can see that it is specific. We can see that it is time bound. And we can also see that that example is honest about what you can study and what you can really and actually investigate. All right. Number 10. We are almost there. We have 2 more to go. Please do not fall in love with your first title. I think I'd spoken about this as well within our last few episodes. All right. You have your first title. In most cases, you'll find that you actually have a topic and not necessarily a title. You going back and reworking on your title over and over again, 3rd draft, 4th draft, 5th draft. I don't know about a 10th draft, but whatever improvements that you make to your title is proof that you're growing as a researcher. So try as much as possible not to have attachment issues with your first title, because in most cases it might not actually be your best. Keep on working on it, keep on improving. Number 11, please do not forget to tell us who you are studying. So always make sure that you define who your population is. All right. One of the things that you can ask yourself after you have done putting together your title, or while you are putting together your title, is 3 questions: who, where, and when. All right. Your title should at least answer 2 of these questions: who, where, and when. So the 3 W's. All right. Thankfully, I'm not talking about World War I, II, or III. Okay, just who, where, and when. Okay, so for example, saying the impact of remote work on productivity and employee well-being. Which productivity are you talking about? Which employees are you referring to? In which industry? In which country? All right. Remember that I've said time and time again that defining things, having a clear focus is the best way to go. As direct and as focused as your title can be, the better for you. So rephrasing this into remote work and employee well-being, perceptions of call center staff in the South African financial services sector during the post-COVID period is much better. We even now have a time frame there. All right. So we are talking about call center staff when we're talking about remote work. We're talking about this within the South African context. We're talking about the financial services sector, and we're talking about a certain time period, which is after COVID. All right. So the more focused your title is, the better. Remember the 3 W's: who, where, and when. All right. And finally, number 12, which is something that is extremely important. There is a very big difference between a research title and a research question. Make sure that your research title does not end with a question mark. It should be in the form of a statement. All right. If, let's say, you were writing an opinion piece or you were writing an article, then you can play around with your titles even more. You can actually have a title that is in the form of a question mark. But for an academic study, it has got to be in the form of a statement. All right. So saying, for example, does social media use affect the mental health of adolescents in South Africa? That is more of a research question and not a research title. All right. The research title belongs basically to your chapter 1, and your title declares what the study is about and not necessarily what it is asking. Okay, so rephrasing this into a statement format would be the relationship between social media use and mental health among adolescents in urban South Africa. You can see that we're basically talking about the same thing. It has the same intent, but there is now no question mark. Your title has got to be academic, it has got to be declarative, and it also has got to be precise. All right, so we have run through the 12 things that you have got to avoid every single time when you are putting together your research title. And just to summarize this again, all right. So number 1, make sure that you avoid a discipline mismatch. And number 2, make sure that your title is not too long. Number 3, try and avoid filler phrases as much as possible. Number 4, make sure that your title is not too broad. Number 5, also make sure that it is not too narrow. Number 6, stay away from opinionated language. Number 7, do not go overboard with your abbreviations. Try and avoid that as much as possible, and make sure that you define your abbreviations before you use them later on within your writing. Number 8, a topic is very different from a title. Do not confuse the two. Number 9, do not overpromise. Do not say that you are going to give the world and all you can give is Gauteng. All right. Always make sure that you are able to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Number 10, do not have attachment issues to your first title. Number 11, always make sure that you define your population. Remember the 3 W's: who, when, and where. And number 12, please avoid making sure that your title is a question mark. It should be in the form of a statement. It has got to be academic. It has got to be declarative, and it has got to be precise. So always make sure that whatever you say you are going to do, you will do it, because that is literally what your title is. It is a promise. All right. So you have got to make sure that your study can keep it. This is Research Methodology with Dr. Pree, where we make research simple, relatable, and even a little bit fun. Which everyday analogy should we use to explain another research concept? Up until next week, stay curious and stay rigorous.